365 Sports from Bayou Bull. I like how the Aggies try throwing shade at the Big 12 while pretending to have class. Hey, that yesterday was a big deal. And had they not won, you know what the responses would have been the other way around, which is kind of, well, the massive domination over the years. From Mike, I'm glad Oklahoma and Texas going to get bullied in the SEC like they bullied everyone else in the Big 12.
You know, I do think it was interesting listening to Ryan. Aggies fans are definitely not, I think for the most part, very excited about UT's addition, and I can understand why. But at the same time, you see that spice that comes with that rivalry. And, I don't know if I think at least early on it's obviously going to be a big deal, and I'm sure it'll always get steady ratings just because the state of Texas will always be invested. But it'd be really interesting to see how that rivalry kind of grows in the SEC. And, should have had it the last several years in the Big 12. Everyone's knocked the Big 12. The Big 12 didn't have Texas A&M at their disposal, because obviously things went sideways where Aggies felt they needed to leave. So, as much as the Big 12 mishandled or whatever, there was a lot in their arsenal that they should have had that left because of problems with UT. And so, the SEC, I'm sure, will do a much better job because they've got more schools on that level and more powerful people to be able to, say, no, shut up and go sit in the corner. It's not your turn to talk right now, whereas they've never been told that before. So I think that will help matters. But, I understand, and Texas fans will take this as hating or whatever. I don't really care. I understand the Big 12 is going to make less money, and I understand that makes their future a little bit more uncertain. But I cannot wait to see it without Texas in there because I do think it's going to be really interesting to see politically kind of how it changes and how the conference sort of, without that sort of watchdog bully or whatever you want to call it, and even Oklahoma to some extent, but having them out of the equation, constantly being the one that, like, we need to make this decision, but what are mom and dad going to say? That kind of thing, that's going to go out the window. And I think it's going to allow for, so much freedom for these schools to really operate more freely. Now, again, it's going to probably hurt in the pocketbooks.
No,
but,
it will. Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I understand that, but I do think there is going to be something to gain from it. And hopefully if those things all go the right way and that freedom is there and you put on a good product, that money will be made up somewhat to where it's not, an Achilles heel for you down the road.
Well, Texas joining the SEC ultimately was kind of the ultimate 180 on them because they didn't believe that the good of the many outweighed the good of the one. And that's what the SEC believes, is that the good of the many outweighs the good of the one because they know that there's strength in numbers, which is why Texas and Oklahoma are going there, because it's strong not just because Alabama and Georgia and Florida are there, but because everybody there is strong, like it's not just three schools. Everybody's got strong roots. Even if they don't win in athletics, they've got a plan together. They've grown this big SEC corporation into this, gigantic
Mississippi
behemoth.
State and Vanderbilt are just as important to the overall group.
Yeah.
Or they have so far.
And
if the Big 12 never had that.
Texas always operated as if they were like Notre Dame, a major independent. That was,
you're lucky to have us.
They were kind of operating as that. And truth be told, that maybe, they should have done that a long time ago when the SWC. If that's what you wanted to do, go be a major independent, because if there's an athletic department in the country that can handle it and people would play them, they could, and they'd be in the conversation, they could have pulled it off. But they, politics got the better of them. And honestly, had Texas, I know all this stuff about Ann Richards and Bob Bullock and every political move they pulled behind the scenes, but had Texas really said, you know what, all this that you guys are doing is dumb. Why don't Baylor and why don't you let TCU take our place? Baylor and Tech can go and A&M can be in the Big 12. We're going to be a major independent. That's what we're going to do. And if Ann Richards said no, they could have been like, well, that was at the time where people didn't really look into things. Like if Rick Perry or Greg Abbott had tried to stop anything, but all the schools have been like, no, go back to your office. We've got this.
What they also are doing is because they can, and because they have a massive amount of clout, and they still will, but it will be a little bit different the way it's tossed around. And I look forward, as much as we look forward maybe to the new Big 12 once it actually is official and Texas and Oklahoma move on. Texas and Oklahoma, I think, are also, even though there's some fan bases that maybe don't want to do it, I don't know, this is kind of fresh air for them too. Maybe they needed it. Yeah.
No, it absolutely is. And again, it's not about Texas and their move or what. I'm just saying I'm looking forward to there not being this team that feels like they're above you the entire time and they're too good to be, aligned with you, because that's how it's felt for well over a decade in the Big 12. And for all the other schools, whether it be Baylor or Tech or TCU or West Virginia or Iowa State, they've all felt that at one point or another. They know that their opinion doesn't matter as much as UT's ultimately does. And my whole thing is, of course it's fresh air. I think Texas and OU are getting a fresh breath of a little preview, and they're excited and they're looking forward to all the new road trips. Of course, all the money that the fans aren't going to necessarily see outside of improvements and whatnot, but all of that's great. Like, I totally get their standpoint. My whole thing is just that I'm looking forward to there not being that we're too good for you, you're lucky that we're here, and you're going to miss us when we're gone attitude. No, I'm not. They might miss the money that goes with it, but I'm not they, so I don't care. I'm going to look forward to it not being as much of a you're just lucky to be here. Yep. I'm looking forward to a conference that's actually on the same page for once in the last 25, 30 years.
And one of the things that comes with that, the remaining 8 plus the new schools, the 4 schools, now everybody, and they know it, they all have to step up themselves and get bigger, better, faster, stronger, as much as they possibly can. From Jack Huffman, he goes, I wouldn't be surprised if Texas and OU do just fine in the SEC. Not that I'm a fan, but I think they'll be better than most think. And I do agree with that. I don't know about ripping off consecutive championships or whatever, but I think it will be a breath of fresh air for them. And I think if they're capable of it, I think both of them are. It won't be easy, and at times there'll be some bumps and bruises. From Juan, Huffman, I think you're right, but I also think it's possible the SEC teams bring their best game against those two, especially against Texas. Also from Wake, good to hear from you as well from Texas Tech.
I definitely think both can go and succeed. I mean, they're in the College World Series right now. They've had success in basketball at times. They're both expected to be good this year in football. I think, I don't have any delusions that they're going to go there and they're both going to become irrelevant. When does a blue blood become irrelevant? I mean, the system doesn't allow for you to really become all that irrelevant.
Just had Michigan until this last year.
And it's like nothing ever changed, right? Yeah. So I was like, you never really fall out of that blue blood relevancy, even if you go years without being all that relevant. But yeah, I think all the stuff is going to work well for them. Again, my only thing is just, it's going to take a hit of money for the Big 12. To what extent, don't know. But I do think it's going to be a fun and unique conference in its own right that maybe finally does have an identity that's not, we're just at the mercy of these two. Because that's what your identity has basically been for the last 2 decades, in my opinion. And that's going to change. And some of it will be for the worse, but I think a lot of that could be for the better.
And to play devil's advocate for Texas, I know that, it sounds like we're kind of dumping on them, but look, DeLoss Dodds was the first modern athletic director. He was the guy who was ahead of the curve on everything when it came to building a modern athletic department. He was brilliant. What happened eventually, though, was they took a big chunk with that Longhorn Network, and that was kind of a bridge too far of look, we've acquiesced to all this other stuff. We can't do this here, especially when the SEC, across the way at the same time is saying, we're going to have a channel for all of us together to make our brand bigger, and not just one school. And that was the bridge too far, which ultimately pulled the plug on the Big 12 as we knew it. And but DeLoss Dodds built it to that way. It was everybody else who had to catch up. So, it was A&M's fault for a long time for making, old coaches and former athletes the athletic director and not getting a businessman who knew what he was doing in the modern era. It was Baylor's fault for not having a weight room that had more than 2 Nautilus machines for a long time. It was everyone else's fault for not looking at Texas and going, how can we do that? As opposed to, trying to match them. They've done that now, but, DeLoss Dodds wasn't wrong when he said, we are the Joneses.
No, he did.
He wasn't wrong.
He was right.
And he made them the Joneses.
Yeah, he was. But the problem is they started to believe that themselves.
Yeah.
Instead of, when he eventually moved on, of course, then they lost sight of it. They had some issues with who was running the athletic department and elsewhere. Hey, they're a hell of a school, man. Great university, great traditions. maybe on the cusp of being even better if their football team can turn it around, because everything else seems to be doing just fine.
Yeah, and I don't like the fact that we talk about them and we have to always throw out a disclaimer of it's like the only school that we have to do that with. And Oklahoma's not guilt-free in this. I mean, they made the same move Texas did, but they do get to kind of lurk in the shadows and let UT take all of the blame for the move. But I know, being from an OU family, that they're super excited and pumped up. There's a little bit of reservation about how well football is going to go ultimately, because it's not going to be the same kind of walk that you're having in the Big 12 and all the success that you've had there. I mean, they're not going to go and win 7 straight SEC championships in football. I mean, that's not going to happen. So, they're in that same mix. It's not just Texas, and we're not even pointing out or blaming anything. Like I said, kudos to them for all the moves they're making. I'm just saying that it's going to be more fun for the Big 12 fan to not have to worry about the constant threat of, well, if you don't do what we want to do, we're going to leave. And if you don't do this, then this is what we want. There's just none of that anymore. And I don't think there will be that element of that in the SEC, because, again, they'll be more surrounded by like-minded and as well-rounded schools. Whereas in the Big 12, they could look down on everybody. So that will be an interesting dynamic, to not have that looking down and more of that equal eye-to-eye conversation in the Big 12. And that will be an interesting dynamic for those two schools to then go to a conference where, oh, yeah, you're also looking now in the eye. You're no longer looking down. You're looking in the eye of Alabama and Georgia and all these other schools that are on your level. And so it's going to be unique for both, but I think it'll be great for both. That's my whole point.
From Paxton, who's a UT fan, he starts to quote scores from back in the day, 62-0 of 2005. How many national titles does Baylor have? Who was the last Big 12 team to win a national championship?
Just perfect timing, dude.
Paxton,
Perfect.
You're actually
brother.
You're proving our point.
What did I just say 30 seconds ago? You had to talk about Texas. You had to put a disclaimer up and explain it so they can understand it.
And then if Saban retires at the end of the season, no, he does not. Stop. You're just listening to others who cover your school.
Nick Saban is never going to retire.
Just proved
He's just going to evaporate.
Mentioned. Oh, by the way, we appreciate your time. Sikkim 365 Radio and Paul's Top 5 is next.